Shalom from Israel, I'm Ariel Ben Abraham. This week we're going to reflect on chapter 21 of the book of Psalms by King David. Let's start with verse 1. The king rejoices in your strength, Lord. How great is his joy in the victories you give. King David is giving credit to God for all his victories. We know that King David is a king warrior of Israel with a lot of enemies within Israel and outside Israel that he has to fight. And in this first verse, he acknowledges that his victories are God's victories. Now we have to understand this obviously in a deeper level. It's not just acknowledging God as the one behind his victories, but acknowledging that everything we do, everything we achieve, everything we create is an emanation of God. Now this is hard to understand and to assimilate by people who believe in God, basically. So, because most of us believe that what we have achieved in life, what we have created in terms of our own inventions, creativity, all of this comes from ourselves. So we don't have to give credit to God. So this is very, I want to say difficult, but probably difficult is not the word. It's complex because we see that we do things by our own volition, by our own will. So it's hard for us to understand that our free will is naturally attuned with God's will. Now you may say, how about if we do something wrong, something bad, something negative? Is that also according to God's will? Ultimately, in the long run, yes, because there's a greater purpose in evil and in negative situations, circumstances, adversity. There is a plan, but the plan is to learn, not to stay in the status quo, in the situation. It's like, oh, there's evil, that we have to cope with it, accept it, and keep going. That's basically what we have done throughout history, allowing evil to exist and in sometimes to prevail. But let's go back to the free will issue. We have referred to this before in our blog and in some of the videos. We have free will. God, of course, created us with free will. He wants us to be free. But at the same time, the reason we have said also that we have, in order to have free will, we need to have opposites. So good and evil, right and wrong, false and truth, etc. So in order to choose, to make a choice. But God in the Torah says clearly, many times, that we have free will in order to choose goodness. So in other words, evil, negativity, adversity, suffering, and the negative traits and trends in consciousness exist for the sole purposes of being references in order to choose the opposite, goodness. That's the whole idea. So when David is saying that God is behind, like the reason of his victories, he's talking about goodness. It's like King David wants to make goodness prevail. Why? He's a good Jew. He knows the Torah. He understands that God's plan is to make goodness prevail. Therefore, we have to fight our enemies, the enemies of this goodness. You have to understand that the enemies of Israel at the deeper level are the enemies of goodness. If you read the Torah, Israel represents goodness. It's evident. That doesn't mean that every Jew is good, but you understand that the Torah is defining Israel, the children of Israel, of the paradigm of goodness. And throughout history, we have seen that Jews have been contributing extremely in positive ways to the betterment of humankind. And the first contribution is the Torah, the Hebrew Bible. We know that. Everybody knows that. So, going back to the verse, David is basically attuning his life, every aspect of his life as a king, as a leader, as a man, as a husband, as a father, to fulfill God's will. That's the whole idea. So by doing goodness, he's doing God's will. So everything good that comes out of fighting for goodness comes from God. Because this is the way we understand that goodness is its own cause and effect. That the cause of goodness is goodness and the effect of goodness is goodness. Thus we understand this. So when we are in attunement with God, then everything we do is God's will. When we are attuned, we emphasize and we repeat, when we are attuned with goodness. And again, coming back to the fact that we are God's creatures, coming from the goodness of God, then our natural reason for life is goodness, is to pursue goodness. We do that ever since we're born. We have to take care of each other. We have to make goodness, happiness, and well-being prevail. So we may say, oh, we are basically created by default for goodness. Yes, essentially yes, by default. But still we have free choice. And again, free choice exists within the context of learning. It's not just exercising goodwill. It's not saying, oh, I'm going to choose yellow over red. There's a reason behind. And the ultimate reason, and the ideal reason, is goodness. So when David is acknowledging God, that all his victories come from God, he's right. Verse 2, you have granted him his heart's desire and have not withheld the request of his lips. He's talking to himself in third person. He's talking about the king. So David detaches himself from his royal mantle and refers himself in the third person. He, the king, requests, and God answers. Again, the fact that David is detaching himself from his crown, so to speak, teaches us a few things, but let's concentrate on two that are essentials to understand King David's personality. First, humbleness. He's detaching himself from being a king. He's a regular person, he's a regular man. He refers to the king as something, not someone. And in this case, we understand kingdom, kingship, as a quality of consciousness, or the quality in consciousness that makes goodness rule in everything we do, we think, we feel, we say. That's the idea. So we're talking about the Jewish king Messiah We're talking about a the highest consciousness, highest level of consciousness that is closest to God, that rules every aspect and dimension of life. That's the king. That's the ruler. This highest level of consciousness that rules. In some of our commentaries, we have referred to this ruling consciousness as the high priest. The high priest who is in the temple, and the temple represents, as we have said many times in our blog and in the videos, represent our awareness, the awareness of our permanent connection with God. The permanent connection, an awareness. And the high priest is the one that makes this permanent awareness manifest in life. It's implemented. Now you may ask, so what is the difference between the high priest and the king? Of course, there seems to be a difference. They are complementary roles. They complement each other. Throughout history, the kings consulted with the high priest before going to war. So there's some kind of consulting here. But again, they're part of the same consciousness. Now, at the end, in the final redemption in the Messianic era, the king will play, or so to speak, will have these two roles. Now, there will be, of course, a high priest, it will be, but the main reference will be the king, not the high priest. So the priesthood, the kingship is going to be above the priesthood. It's not going to be at the same level as it used to be. Now, this is for the Messianic era. But the temple will be there, and there will be priests officiating in it. But the one that will be in contact, in this direct contact, this permanent awareness of our connection with God, is the king. And again, let's understand the king as this principle, this foundation that rules every aspect and dimension of life, which is goodness. The goodness of love's ways and attributes. So, let's repeat it again, this verse 2. You have granted him his heart's desire and have not withheld the request of his lips. So when we are in connection with God all the time, everything is requested, everything is manifest. Is there. There is nothing that we have to wait long term. Everything is automatic, is instant, instantaneous. Verse 3. You came to greet him with rich blessings and placed a crown of pure gold on his head. So it's interesting how David still keep disattaching himself from the crown. God is doing everything. So this verse is about acknowledging that God's will is what it is. It's the one that is being done. This is very important. You came to greet him with rich blessings. This is the fact that God is with us is the greatest blessing, because all the blessings come from this connection. And place a crown of pure gold on his head. Now, we have to understand this, of course, the inner meanings of this. What is a gold crown? Crown is placed in the highest part of the body, which is the head, the top of the head. And gold, the symbol of gold that we have mentioned many times, refers to the highest level of consciousness. From where we achieve the awareness of our permanent connection with God. That's the crown. So the crown implies a connection with the above. Verse 4. He asked you for life, and you gave it to him. Length of days forever and ever. David is talking about, clearly, we can see it in this verse, about the Jewish king Messiah. Why? Because he will reign eternally. And again, let's try to understand that the idea of the king Messiah in Judaism is the final stage of human consciousness that God has designed, has created for us to prevail forever. So David is making reference to the future king Messiah. He asked you for life, and you gave it to him. So life, just being alive physically. We're talking about the whole purpose of life in all this multidimensional reality. So life is not just the physical life, the spiritual life, it's the lives in every level of consciousness, in everything we can imagine and conceive. So he asked you for life and you gave it to him, length of days forever and ever. Verse 5. Through the victories you gave, his victory is great. Again, David is acknowledging that every step we take to overcome negative traits and trends in consciousness, God rewards us, rewards our efforts. He gives us victory. As long as you use his goodness, the goodness that he wants us to prevail in every aspect of life, put it first. It's like we're doing things with the focus and purpose of goodness, God will provide the resulting goodness. That's his reward. But our premise, our precondition is goodness. The way we defeat our the addictions, attachments, negative patterns of behavior, negative traits, trends in consciousness, we have to approach them pursuing goodness, because they're not good. Therefore, we switch with goodness. So we want to quit a particular addiction. We have to focus in goodness, not just in the addiction itself. It's like the only way that I will renounce and abandon this addiction is to replace it by its opposite. What is the opposite? Goodness. It's something that is good to me, not that is bad to me. And again, in Judaism and in general, goodness in Judaism is an absolute concept. It's not relative then. It's a little goodness and goodness like this and like that. It doesn't work that way. It's absolute. There is no space for anything but goodness in goodness. So there is no gray here. So be careful with this. We have to look for the gray. Nothing is black and white. No. Either it is good or it isn't. So let's understand it that way. So, through the victory you gave, his glory is great. In other words, in everything good that we achieve, the result is even greater. You have bestowed on him splendor and majesty. It's like the radiance of goodness and the majesty of goodness. So don't take this literally as a king with these shiny robes or garments. We're talking about the shine and the splendor of love. Love's ways and attributes. Those are the best garments we can wear. Those are our radiance, our light, our splendor. What else could it be? Six, surely you have granted him unending blessings and made him glad with the joy of your presence. It's like, who could be unhappy in the presence of God? This is probably the greatest happiness, the greatest joy that we can experience. So this is what we want, to be happy in order to achieve, to connect with this happiness of seeing the presence of God, living the presence of God in us and among us. And again, we have to look for what attracts what. Our love attracts God's love. Our goodness attracts God's goodness. So this is our blessing, the unending blessings of goodness. Because goodness, we repeat, is something absolute, is transcendental, transcends everything. It's not limited by time or space. It's eternal. And again, our joy is goodness. It's our goodness. The goodness we pursue, the goodness we achieve, the goodness we live. That's our joy. We are happy when we are good and we have goodness in life. And the goodness of love's ways and attributes. That's our happiness. We experience this when we hug our friends or the people that are close to us. And then the happiness we experience by having that goodness, that love. And made him glad with the joy of your presence. Wow. Verse 7, for the king trusts in the Lord through the unfailing love of the Most High. He will not be shaken. So our certainty is goodness. Our certainty is love's ways and attributes. That's our connection with God. God's goodness, God's love. So we have to trust, obviously, in goodness. I mean, how can, of course, we have to trust goodness. Why we need it? We are nurtured by goodness. We are alive by goodness. Therefore, we have to, it's like the air. The air is good. We trust the air. We trust the sun, the moon. Because those give us life. So we trust that the sun is going to come up every morning. So let's use these references to really go to who is behind those. The air, the sun, the moon. And the goodness. It's God. So therefore we have to trust God, not the sun, not the moon, not the air. Some people say, I trust money than God. Yeah. They do. But what they don't know is that money comes from God. Oh, we created the system of money. Yeah, but God is behind because we are His creatures. He created us. He knows how we work, how we are. So one of the fundamental messages of the book of Psalms is to trust God. But again, it's not an abstract thing of trusting an old man with a long beard, like some kind of sad. No. Talking about goodness, love's ways and attributes. Those we have to trust. Because we need that. We know that our life is empty, is dead, without love, without goodness. They're the same, by the way. So when we say the goodness of love's ways and attributes, goodness is a motive, is a result of love. It's inherent to love. Otherwise, we cannot love and be bad. That's what the Nazis did. They thought that they were doing something bad and they were loving. They still were loving people. They loved his family, the dogs, their leader. They believed that. They make goodness something relative. You know, we are good among each other, but we're not going to be good against the Jews, against the gypsies, against the blacks, and against homosexuals, and against this and against that. You know what I'm saying? Goodness is an absolute thing. It's unconditional. But there's an ethical principle. That doesn't mean that goodness is condoning something that the Torah prohibits. If God is telling us, this is wrong, I don't want you to do this, this is an abomination to me, says God, we have to listen. He has reasons, not our reasons, His reasons. So we have to pay attention to what He says to us. So if He says to us, you have to put tefillin every day, we have to. Yeah, but what is the point of doing this? And we have to. He wants us to do that. So there's an ethical principle, even if we don't understand, there's an ethical principle. By ethical principle, we're talking about righteousness, the righteousness in goodness. So goodness is nothing relative again, it's something absolute. It's absolute good. This is very, very important to grasp. So the king trusts in the Lord through the unfailing love of the Most High. Because the king, this principle of goodness comes from God's love, through the unfailing love of the Most High of God. Talking about God's love here. That's what we call this channel in YouTube and the commentaries in our blog, God's love. It's about that. It's here. Mentioned many times, by the way, in the Torah and in the Hebrew Bible. He will not be shaken. How can we shaken? How can we be afraid? As we said before, who could be against what goodness is with us? Only goodness. Unless it's not completely good. So we have to be careful about that. Sometimes we believe that we're doing something good, but it's not entirely good. It's a hidden agenda there. It's egos, fantasies, and illusions behind. And then we see that the result is not that good. Because this is absolute. This is an absolute concept. Okay. Verse 8. Your hand will lay hold on all your enemies. Your right hand will seize your foes. It's interesting. David again is giving credit to God about our victories and how we prevail over our enemies. So this is essential. It's like you are behind. So he's calling, David is calling his enemies God's enemies. Why? Because of what we said before. When there's this common bond with God, that our focus, our reference, our purpose is goodness, then everything that is not good is also enemy of God's goodness. This is what David is. That's the way David is acknowledging God. He's like, hey, your goodness is the one that is destined to prevail. Therefore, he said, you defeat my enemies. So that your enemies, we call them God's enemies. And again, we're talking about God's hand. We're talking about the goodness of God. So it's like God created us with the work of his hands. We come from his goodness, his love. Your right hand will seize your foes. So again, goodness will prevail. Goodness will turn everything negative, wicked, evil into goodness. That's the idea, by the way. It's not like a fight here between good and evil, then the God of evil and the God of goodness. No. We're here to transform evil into good. That's what we have to do. Any negative situation that we may experience into goodness. So if we're feeling envy, we have to be generous. If we feel wrath, we have to be happy. We have to be sharing happiness with everybody. If we are coveting, we give. Because giving is the negation of lack. We have, therefore we give. It's a matter of turning things aside, around. It is said that bringing light to darkness is not just the like turning on a light. Oh, everything, we have light now. There's nothing dark here. Sometimes when we do this process of turning something, the light, putting the light on something, we have to know what it is. We see it clearly, because before we didn't see it because there was no light. So therefore, bringing light is not just the fact of the material fact of bringing light to a dark place. It's to transform. It's like turning on the light, coming into the room, see that the room is a mess, and fixing it. So we don't stumble, with something on the floor or something. We have to fix what it is with the light that is helping us to arrange what is not arranged. So, verse 9, when you appear for battle, you will burn them up as in a blazing furnace. In Judaism, there's a metaphor. One of the metaphors of God is water, fire, the hand of God, truth, peace. There are many attributes of God in the Hebrew Bible. And one of them is fire. We have to be careful with that, because if we immediately, when we hear about fire, it's like something that is burning, which is true. So, it's not something that we see the fire and when I walk in the fire, nothing's going to happen to us. But this is the material fire. We're not talking about the divine fire, which is God's love, by the way. The fire of God is his love. It's God to transform, to destroy what is negative and make it as love as God's love. In our own consciousness, of course. God's love is his love. And then we have our love. Then the lesson is we have to apply our own fire, the fire of our love, to transform what is wrong, what is evil, what is negative, what is not good. So David is acknowledging God's love of this blazing furnace that in battle, meaning in the confrontation of something that is wrong, prevails. Okay? And we continue the second part of verse 9, the second sentence. It said, the Lord will swallow them up in his wrath, and his fire will consume them. We have said many times, because it was one of the reasons we write the blog, is to clear up this metaphor, these allegories. When we're talking about the wrath of God and the anger of God, we're talking about our separation from him. We experience pain when we are separated from the people we love, we admire, we care for. It's painful. We know that. This is obvious. Same thing with God. So our separation from God, God's ways and attributes in this case. We're not talking about the old man with a long beard. No. Be careful. That doesn't exist in Judaism. These are metaphor references to relate, to understand God's attributes, which all are good. So we're talking about when the Hebrew Bible, including the book of Psalms, talk about God's wrath and anger and jealousy. We're talking about the separation, because those are feelings of the end result of separation. We're angry because we don't want what we have, we don't have what we want. We are upset because we're separated from what we want. And we're jealous because we don't have what we want, the way we want. Now, that's the way we want. In the case of God, we're talking about God's ways and attributes. So when we are not following God's ways and attributes, then God is jealous of us. But we are separating ourselves from him. It is not jealous, it's not wrath, it's not angry. That's the result of our separation from him. He loves us. Therefore, he's angry, in these metaphors. He's jealous. So let's understand this as a separation, not as punishment from God. It's the own punishment we impose on ourselves with our separation from goodness. That's what it is. So when people say, oh, God punishes you because of the evil things that you do, this is not God's punishment. It's the direct consequence of our transgressions. As simple as that. And we know that, by the way. We know that. Verse 10. You will destroy their descendants from the earth, their posterity from mankind. In other words, David is talking about the future, the Messianic era, in which the evil would be completely wiped out from the face of earth, including from our consciousness. So it's not just outside that we don't want to see wild animals and natural disasters coming, destroying people and cities. And not just that. We're talking about evil from consciousness. This is very important. So David, in this verse 10, he's talking about the descendants of in other words, the extension. This is the metaphor of descendants, the extension, the continuation, the prolongation of evil that would stop in the Messianic era. Verse 11. Though they plot evil against you and devise wicked schemes, they cannot succeed. Obviously, in the end, in the long run, what we want is goodness prevail. Even in our immediate reality of life, and also in the Messianic era, in the final redemption. So this is a lesson to start now with ourselves individually. That don't wait for that moment. It will come, yes. But we are destined to make goodness prevail in our own immediate individual reality. So this is an invitation for this. Like, be aware, evil is not going to prevail. It's temporary. It's a reference. It will not succeed. Therefore, the message here is like, just goodness. Go for goodness. Because there's nothing in evil. Now we may use it in the opposite way. Oh, evil will end one day, therefore I will do evil. Because after all, one day it will cease to exist, so I better do evil now before evil disappears. That's not the logic here. Although some people think that way. It's like, oh, we have endless, infinite reincarnations and lives and forever and ever. Everything is an unending cycle. Therefore, I'm going to do whatever I want because in the next line, we'll pay and again and again and we have time for this. Some people believe that. They're basically delusional. Because what we want, the underlying desire, yearning that we have in our consciousness is for love's ways and attributes and the goodness. That's what we want. So let's be aware of this. Verse 12. You will make them turn their backs when you aim at them and drawn bow. In other words, it's like a warrior who is drawing a bow in order to shoot. So David is using the metaphor of a warrior who is going to destroy the enemy. In other words, it's a process. We are drawing the bows, like this is a process in which we want to remove what is not necessary anymore in our consciousness and in our lives. So we have to do something about that. So in other words, you may turn their backs when you aim at them. It's like it will change. It sounds like destruction, but again, this is about it. You pay attention to the Hebrew Bible, especially prophets and David's prophecies in this case, in this particular chapter 21. We're talking about a change in consciousness, in which evil will not be a reference or anything anymore, it won't exist anymore. This is what we have to understand. Therefore, let's choose goodness, because we know that goodness will prevail, stay with us forever, endlessly. So let's embrace it now and trust it, as we trust the eternal love, the eternal presence of God. The last verse is verse 13, which says, "Be exalted in your strength, Lord. We will sing and praise your might." So David is acknowledging that everything comes from God's love, but he's calling God's love the power of God. And it makes sense, because creation exists as an emanation from God's love. So the might of God in this case is God's love. And actually it's the most powerful force, thing we have in life. We know that too. So, be exalted in His love. We have to exalt God in His love. That's the strength of God, by the way. But again, we say strength of God. Is how come that God needs strength? It doesn't need strength. It's by itself. It's inherent to Him. It's the Creator. It's the owner of His creation. So David again begins this chapter exalting God, as acknowledging God's power, love behind everything, His victories in battle, this goodness that we pursue in consciousness. And he said, we will sing and praise your might, we will sing and praise your love, your goodness. We'll be happy in the goodness we have as the material manifestation, expression of God's goodness. So with this, we finish our reflections on chapter 21st of the book of Psalms. We wish you, as usual, an abundantly blessed week. Shabbat Shalom. And until next week.